Hey guys, with everyone jumping into the new Xbox full screen mode or handhelds, I felt like diving into. But I didn't want just to give another quick hands on or setup guide, since those are already everywhere. I wanted to do something more focused on performance. The question is pretty simple. Does this new Xbox mode actually improve gameplay by stripping away some of Windows 11 usual background processes? To find out, I ran a full set of benchmarks on my ROG Ally X with the latest BIOS version and VRAM allocation set to default 8 GB. Now, the official release of 25H2 with Xbox full screen isn't out yet. It's expected to be released in October of this year. So just like everyone else, I'll be testing on Windows 11 insider builds. And to make things fair and as broad as possible, I benchmarked both the dev channel and the release preview channel. So I wanted to see the difference between the two builds. Of course, I had to skip Canary build even if it's technically more up to date, but this channel will pack more bugs, less polished, and often include features that never make it to the public release. That's why I stuck with dev and release preview, since they are closer to what real end users will eventually get. If we look at the dev and release preview builds, we'll see the same OS build number 26,200 and also the same experience version. But even when those numbers match, the two builds can still behave very differently. Why? Because the dev channel usually carries extra debugging tools, telemetry, and experimental code that never makes it into the public release. As the name suggests, it's made for developers. The release preview build is more of a clean build. It's closer to what end users will actually get, with fewer hidden processes. That's exactly why I wanted to compare them side by side. And of course, I'll be stacking both against the latest stable public release, Windows 11 24H2 build 26,100. Now, when I first loaded up Xbox full screen mode on a fresh reboot, I was honestly pretty excited. But that excitement quickly faded away the moment I opened Task Manager and saw Microsoft Edge running in the background. Even though I never opened it myself, it was chewing through about 500 MB of RAM, just like your typical Windows 11 setup. And you can see it's enabled at OS Startup, so I immediately disabled it like I usually do. But it really made me feel like we are still not free from the usual Windows bloatware. Anyway, with that sorted out, before jumping into actual gaming, let's first check a pure CPU benchmark, that is Cinebench R23. And just to be clear, when I say here, dev, I'm referring to the development channel of 25H2, while prev means the release preview channel, the more polished, public-ready one. Now in multi-core score, both 20W and 30W showed basically no difference across the three Windows builds. Scores come in around 10,700 at 20W and about 13,500 at 30W. So we can say for sure that CPU performance doesn't improve or get worse at least. Now moving on to 3D Mark. Starting with Steel Nomad Lite. At 20W, all three setups scored above 2,300. And at 30W, they all landed around 2,700. I also ran Time Spy. And as you can see in both benchmarks, there is nothing major to report here. But don't worry, once we dive into the game benchmarks, things get a lot more interesting. I tested 11 games all at 900p with low settings to remove as much of a hardware bottleneck as possible. First game we have is Cyberpunk 2077. On the release preview build, VRAM usage was noticeably lower compared to 24H2. Same resolution, same GPU driver, but on 24H2, it sat around 4 GB, while 25H2 preview dropped to just 3.4 GB. What's even more impressive that it was the same case at 20W and 30W runs. Now FPS-wise, preview led by about 2 FPS over 24H2, while dev was behind both. At 20W, preview and 24H2 were neck and neck, with dev clearly struggling. So we can say that a small win here for 25H2 preview. Less VRAM, slightly more FPS. Next up, Horizon Zero Dawn. This one flipped things around. On preview, RAM usage actually spiked by about 1 GB compared to 24H2. Strange, right? You would expect less, not more, but FPS wasn't actually affected. At 30 watt, preview and the 24H2 were tied, with Dave predictably behind again. Same story at 20 watt. So to sum it here, higher RAM use, but performance stayed flat. Now next game we have is Dirt 5. Here things looked even stranger. On 24H2, RAM usage was around 7,400 MB. Now while on 25H2, it jumped to about 9,100 MB. That's an extra 1.5 GB. Despite that, preview actually pulled ahead slightly, hitting 104 FPS at 30 watt compared to 101 on 24H2. So it's only a 3 FPS boost, not really a groundbreaking, but a win nonetheless. Now getting to Shadow of the Tomb Raider. By now you may be like me, fed up with seeing higher RAM usage on 25H2 again. FPS-wise though, preview was even with 24H2 at 30 watt. Dave though, yeah, it was down by about 8 FPS. And at 20 watt, it fell even further behind. So now after performing worse 4 times in a row, it's crystal clear that the Dave build is consistently the weakest of the bunch. The next title we have is Age of Mythology Retold. Interesting case here. VRAM usage on 25H2 preview was lower by about 300 MB compared to the others. But FPS though, not good at all. Preview lost around 4 FPS at 30 watt and 9 FPS at 20 watt compared to Dave and the 24H2. A big loss here, so I had to run it multiple times and it always gave me the same lower results. Let's get now to our next title, F124. This one was more straightforward. FPS was tied between 24H2 and 25H2 preview, with Dave build falling behind. Next we have is Rainbow Six Siege. This one really showed an interesting fact. On Dave build, for some reason CPU usage was 15% lower compared to the other setups, and that directly translated into worse performance. At 30 watt, both Dave and preview ran about 10 FPS lower than 24H2, but at 20 watt, preview actually pulled ahead a bit, while Dave stayed down by about 12 FPS. But in the next title, Assassin's Creed Mirage, we finally get something positive. Preview actually came out on top here. The Dave build, on the other hand, was weak as always. And honestly, it's kind of funny how some recommend the Dave build for better compatibility with Xbox full screen, but when it comes to performance, it's definitely the worst. Now we'll get into our next title, Far Cry 6. At 30 watt, all builds were pretty much identical. At 20 watt, preview had a slight lead of 2 FPS, with Dave once again trailing. Interestingly, when I ran the Counter-Strike 2 benchmark, it honestly left me pretty shocked. At 30 watt, 24H2 outperformed both 25H2 builds by 13 FPS, and even worse, at 20 watt, the gap was even bigger. I reran the test multiple times and the results stayed consistent. Now we know that CS2 runs on Source 2, which is a very CPU sensitive and relies heavily on low-level optimization and stable CPU thread scheduling. So if the operating system introduces even small changes in background processes, memory handling, or scheduling behavior, performance can actually drop significantly rather than improving. And that's likely why 24H2, the more mature build, ended up pulling ahead here. And finally, my personal favorite of the bunch here, Hollow Knight Silksong. Now since this game doesn't include a built-in benchmark, I kept the in-game scene still to capture a clean performance reading. On the 25H2 preview build, FPS came in a full 16 frames higher compared to both 24H2 and 25H2 dev build. And even at 20 watt, preview stayed comfortably ahead. This one was a really solid win for the 25H2 preview build. So overall guys, if you ask me what are my thoughts about all of this, well, the Xbox full screen experience definitely has potential, but right now it doesn't feel like a massive leap. The 25H2 preview build generally outperformed the 24H2 public build, but the improvements were usually small, and in some cases, performance was actually worse. Still early to judge, so future updates may change things dramatically. But for now at least, I wouldn't necessarily recommend using it until it's officially released and properly optimized. Also to me, it really felt like an unfinished feature. For example, on my Ally X, if I open the quick panel and press show desktop, nothing happens. I'd expected to toggle between desktop and Xbox full screen, but right now, that button is basically out of service. Also, sliding up from the bottom to switch to the Windows desktop doesn't work either. If you touch it, it just bounces you straight back into Xbox full screen. To actually switch between desktop and Xbox, I have to use either RT or LT triggers. And another thing I would like to mention, the UI suggests pressing X will close a window, but for me it didn't do anything. And while the D-pad technically lets you move between windows, using RB and LB to cycle didn't work at all, as it should do. Even here it says so. On the plus side, some shortcuts to still function. Pressing either of the M1 or M2 macro keys with the up arrow opens the keyboard. Macro key plus down brings up the task manager, and macro key plus right opens the tabs switcher. Now if I set control mode to gamepad, I can switch tabs with RB and LB just fine. But then RT and LT stop toggling Xbox and Windows desktop. They just opens the highlighted window if I press them. Switching control mode to desktop is going to fix that. But then oddly enough, if I return to Windows, it drops me into the normal desktop with no way to be back into Xbox full screen mode without having to restart the whole device. At least no other ways that I'm aware of. So finally guys, I would like to say that Xbox full screen mode isn't all terrible, but it's still nowhere near the seamless SteamOS experience. It's still buggy, bloated, and incomplete experience, and performance gains are mild and inconsistent. I honestly expected less RAM usage and a bigger FPS boost, but as you saw, Microsoft Edge browser still auto starts, RAM usage is often higher, and performance gains are a hit or miss. Anyway guys, that was my experience with the new Xbox full screen mode. Now I'm really curious to hear about yours. So if you have tried it, let me know how it went for you down in the comment section. I hope this video helped give you a clear picture of where things stand right now. If it did, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps out a lot. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.